Welcome. My name is Melissa Morbeck, Global Director of Partnerships at the No More Foundation, and I am your host for our conversation. Today, we will be discussing the HBO docuseries, Unveiled, Surviving La Luz del Mundo, along with the series director, Jennifer Tiexiera, and one of the brave survivors, Sochil Martin, who has shared her experience in Unveiled, and through her wider activism has helped open a closed door to thousands of women and children. Before we get into our conversation today, I'd like to take you through a few points of interest about the docuseries itself. Unveiled, Surviving La Luz del Mundo is a three-part documentary series exploring the horrifying yet relatively unknown story of the Christian church La Luz del Mundo, LLDM, and the sexual abuse that scores of members, substantially many of them minors, say they have suffered at the hands of its successive leaders, known as the Apostles. The church was founded in Mexico and has its international headquarters in Guadalajara. It also has branches across the world, including the United States. Told from the point of view of the survivors, the series culminates in the events leading up to the 2019 arrest of the current apostle, Nason Joaquin Garcia, and his trial, shedding light on a story that was all but ignored by most mainstream media in the United States, and illustrating the positive power of social media to unite and provide agency for survivors. This is the story of survivors. We hope you will watch this important documentary series on HBO Max. If you or someone you know is in need of support, Picture Motion has created resource directories available in both English and Spanish on HBO's websites. You will see the links below and also on HBO Max. Our intention for today's conversation is to learn, to listen, and to better understand how we can support and care for those who have experienced sexual violence. Before we get into our conversation today, let's first watch the trailer for Unveiled, Surviving La Luz del Mundo.
We need to do something about it. It's dangerous for us now.
There are chunks of my childhood, black holes, black spaces.
I asked her, how far back does this go? And she said, it goes all the way back.
La Luz del Mundo is a church founded in 1926.
Anywhere you name it, there's a church of the light of the world. La Luz del Mundo claims to have 5 million members in 57 countries.
One of the largest religious cults of our time.
In addition to the yachts and the cars, they have ranches in Texas, in California.
The church has one leader at a time, and that's the apostle.
There have been 3 apostles in the same family.
With 3 generations of abuse that have been covered up till now.
I wanted to prove that I was worthy.
They almost make it seem romantic and like a fairy tale. You're gonna be a princess.
He hit me until I fell.
I was at his mercy for anything he wanted.
You might think it's a sin, but it's not, because it's in the presence of the apostle.
They cut ties with your family.
My mother, she doesn't talk to me.
Yo he perdido a mi familia.
All of the loneliness, it is the worst torture a person can experience.
The reason why I want to remain anonymous is the fear.
If something happens to me, my daughter, or my husband, it's coming from them. This isn't a church. This is some sort of mafia.
First thing we think is exposure. We've got to expose it.
I started to reach out to people in the United States. Everybody in the Me Too movement never got anything back from anybody.
The Bible says maintain justice and do what is right.
This has to stop.
I think that this would have been different if these were white American girls.
We're gonna get justice.
They have so much power.
It got bigger. Everybody exposing this beast.
No vamos a parar hasta encontrar la verdadera justicia.
The truth is there.
Es una burla.
I forgive myself. It was never a blessing.
I want to be a voice for all the other little girls.
We've watched the trailer now, and we get a sense that the harrowing experience of the lives of the people who have become survivors of La Luz del Mundo and what they share with us is important in understanding how we can support people. I'd like to welcome to the conversation Jennifer Tiexiera, the filmmaker behind Unveiled, and Sochil Martin, a strong survivor, an advocate, a mother, and the founder of With You Foundation. Sochil has bravely shared her story in this documentary series. Thank you so much for joining me, Jennifer and Sochil. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Absolutely. It's important that we continue this very important dialogue that started with the HBO series. For those joining us who have not yet seen Unveiled, can you briefly tell us just a bit about your experience as a former member of La Luz del Mundo and how you ultimately decided to leave, and share the story of your abuse?
I was born into the institution 4 generations in by the matriarchs of my family. My great grandmothers were members and founders of the church in Baja California, which led the family to move over to California. And my daughter was also born into it. She's 10 years old now. And that's all I knew. That was my life. That was my world. There were no colors outside of that. Everything was as it was told to me, and that was my truth. That was my reality. My world was the apostle. He was my God. He was my everything. Most girls, they were told love stories of Jasmine and Aladdin, or, Prince Philip and Aurora. Not me. When I was a little girl, the love stories I knew about were in the Bible of these beautiful, heroic women that gave their lives to the servant of gods, to the kings, like Mary, Sarah, Esther. These women were what I wanted to be when I grew up. It was very romanticized to me since I was a little girl, that one day my king would come and he'd swoop me away and he'd take me with him. And I wasn't scared of that. My groomer, my aunt who raised me as my mother, she never made it seem like it was scary. The other women around me as well, who either were Nathan's sisters or the older women from the church, they never made it seem like it was something scary. It was something very romanticized, and it was very beautiful. It was a dream that we all wanted. That particular girls that were whose mothers, in my case, my aunt, my family, they were close to the Joaquins. So it's like they're called the royal family. So if you were close to the royal family, then you were the family that had blessings. But that cost money. That cost money, and it cost your children. And so unfortunately, that's something that my grandparents, they were fooled into. And, I know that my biological mother and my aunt, that they were both taken by the Apostle Samuel. And that's what my aunt taught me. So I really have learned not to take that personally, but I do I do wish to tell the public that what I see now is nothing more than a woman who groomed her child into modern day slavery. And that's my story in a nutshell. I escaped, not because I woke up one day and said, this is all a lie and I'm being abused. Nope. My husband was the one that had to not only physically tell me he was going to leave me. Sorry, this is really close to the airport. He said he had to because he was afraid. He said he was afraid of who I was, of what the church was, and he didn't want his daughter to be anywhere near that place. And I still did not understand. And I kept thinking in my head, again, this was all I knew, that he was the one that was going to go to hell because he didn't understand the big blessing it was. And so it played out little by little in the process of a week. But what really got to me was when they sat us down, when the bishop sat us down, and Jen and her team, they put that in there. And I thought that was very powerful because that was the moment when I saw nothing but a dirty transaction. And I felt like an object all over again. And I said, this is not a church. In that moment, in that room, when they were talking about money and how much would it take to shut us up, and I said, this is a business. And at that moment, I realized that this was not a church. This is not a church of God. This was not real. And until I saw those two little girls after I had told Mason to leave them alone, and I spoke to their parents and there was no way out. That's the moment that I decided to not sit back and have my life all over again, because I wouldn't be able to live with myself. So that was my escape, and that's my story in a nutshell. And the beginning of speaking up, it wasn't easy at all. I lost everything.
You talk about the fact that you lost everything. Where did you find the courage to speak up?
There were two girls that I had groomed. And it's important to say that. Grooming is very, it's a very dangerous tactic that's used in institutions like this. And again, it was done through generations in my family. And I was doing it and I didn't know that it was wrong. And so when I saw everything had exploded and I understood what this was and what was happening to me was abuse, and I essentially just wanted out, and I kind of just wanted to live my life. And this is in the process of like a month where I see the two girls that I had groomed. They're from Ensenada, and they were still young. They were 15. And I saw one of them, and she was dressed like a princess. And she was being taken by her parents to the pastor's house. After I had spoken to them, and I told them, after I showed them messages, after I spoke to the minister, the wives, like I felt like I was going crazy. I wanted to yell at them, and I wanted to tell them to protect their daughter. And that was the moment that I was very angry. I was very angry. I was angry for them. I was angry for me. And I felt like they had not only taken advantage of us, like they were making fun of us. You know, they hoodwinked us, they lied to us. And I saw my life all over again in her, in the process of seconds when I saw her go up there. And that's the moment that I started reaching out.
What happened in that moment, as you say, you started reaching out, but your voice happened. And there are so many women and girls who now see their freedom through your voice. Based on your own experience, do you have any suggestions for how one can recognize that they are in an emotionally or sexually abusive relationship or situation?
I would have to say that really listening to our senses is extremely important. In LDM, for example, we were born with our senses off. They completely dehumanize people in organizations like this. It is scientifically proven that parts of the brain just stop operating normally. And there are women who come into the church much later. But domestic abuse is a very, very big problem in the cult, the Light of the World, in this place. And I would have to say to women, whether they're in a situation like members of the Light of the World or outside, what I learned is to listen to your senses and how does it feel? Does it hurt you? Does it feel wrong? Really listening to those red flags and trusting yourself, trusting your body, trusting your mind, and loving yourself. Love yourself enough to protect yourself. Love yourself enough to listen to your inner voice, and love yourself enough to ask questions, and love yourself enough to heal, is what I would say to survivors.
And does it all happen in a day?
Nope, I'm still working on that. And I've been 8 years out, and I'm still working on it. And depression, suicide thoughts, eating disorder. I'm dealing with a lot of trauma that comes from leaving high control groups like this, and trauma, the way that it was done onto us, is something that we will have to live with for the rest of our lives. And I think that that's important for the world to know, that these high control groups, that's what they do to human beings. They ruin your lives. They rob you of your life. And then when you leave, that's the hardest part. Leaving is the hardest part.
And taking a step each day on the journey.
Yes.
You mentioned earlier that your husband has been incredibly supportive throughout this experience for you. For those of us joining who might have a family member or friend who is a survivor and going through their own recovery journeys, what insight can you offer them for how to best support and care for that loved one?
That's the most essential part of healing and speaking up about your abuse, is having a family member, somebody that you trust, somebody that you love, whether it's a parent or a husband, but to be able to understand that they won't judge. Already you have all of these emotions and these feelings of that are self-harming, and the least you want to do is speak up about it, because then you fear that you'll be left alone again, you'll be abandoned, you'll be scolded at, you'll be put in a space where you were once for so long. And I think that if there are husbands out there, or mothers or fathers, sisters, brothers, listen to her or listen to him. And if he tells you or she tells you that it happened to her too, believe her. Because if you don't, then that can cause trauma, that and it'll have repercussions on that person's trauma for the rest of their life, on top of everything that they're already going through.
Jennifer, I'd like to ask you a few questions, and then I'd sort of like to weave the conversation together for all of us to chat. Can you tell us a bit about how you became involved with sharing the stories of these survivors through Unveiled?
Sure. I've been a documentary filmmaker for about 20 years. This job was actually a director for hire job. I was approached by both Jigsaw, the production company, and HBO. Like many of us, I had never heard of La Luz del Mundo. My mouth hit the ground. And then I started doing my research. I found out that not only were they in all 50 states here in the United States, they claim to be 5 million members deep worldwide. I think that number might be a bit exaggerated, but even if it's half, that's a lot of members. And then that I was completely surrounded by my house in Los Angeles, by the churches, not very far from the church that Sochil went to when she was growing up in East LA. And then I realized that not only did they have this huge presence, that the current apostle had been arrested already and was being held at a $90 million bail here in Los Angeles, and nobody was covering it. I mean, you really had to dig deep. You had to go to the Spanish newspapers. There was one journalist two, Rhonda Schwartz and Brian Ross, who were covering this on the Long Crime Network. And with that, we're able to gain the attention of Jigsaw and HBO, thank God. And so I think coming from that place of really just, again, picking my mouth off the ground and be like, how is this story not being covered? And especially in the time, you brought this up earlier, but, this was the same time that Jeffrey Epstein was being arrested and NXIVM was happening. Why was this case any different? Why weren't we hearing about this, such a high profile case? And I really believe it had to do with who the victims are and who the victims were. And so it was more important than ever to become involved in shining light on this story.
You talk about shining light on this, and you talk about who the victims are and who the victims were. Can you explore just a bit more about that?
Absolutely. We're women of color. Almost every single survivor in all the survivors in Unveiled speak Spanish. A lot of them, most of them are American citizens, but when we were telling this story, and not to say any woman, any survivor, any man who goes through this, it's an atrocity, right? Nobody wants to be talking about this, especially when it's children. But when you have the US mainstream media, when I was making Unveiled, it was the Gabby Petito, and forgive me if I say her name, case. It was on every news channel. Every single time you turned on the news was this blonde hair, blue-eyed girl from, the middle of the country. And we cared so much. And unfortunately, historically, for Black and Brown survivors, we don't have that same sort of coverage and that same sort of exposure for stories like this in the United States mainstream media.
It's frightfully shameful, is all I have to say about that. Preparing for this interview, it was the first time I had heard of this. And especially at the time, during Jeffrey Epstein. And you think about the hundreds, if not thousands, of women who have been groomed and sexually abused. It is shocking that this has not come up more often. What was the journey like between you and Sochil and the other survivors who shared their experiences with you?
Yeah, I think, when you're working on a network schedule, you're not allotted what would be the normal amount of time to forge that relationship. And it's a very deep relationship, the one that has to be built on a foundation of trust. Luckily, I was able to build in some sort of protections with the network and with the production company, as far as my so-called, deal almost, right? We're going into a partnership. So I'm going to make sure that I'm not going to do anything to harm your mental health or to put you in physical danger or affect your potential court cases. This was something that we could constantly go back to. But I also think that it was really important for us to have long conversations. So Jill and we spent, I think it was probably anywhere from 4 to 6 hours on the phone before we actually met in person. And then once we did meet in person, we met with her lawyer, because it was important for me to have that relationship as well, and be very transparent about what we were doing and make sure that all of our goals aligned and that we were working towards the same thing. So it's almost like, we've only known each other for a few years now, but it doesn't feel that way because it was on such an intensive schedule of trust and working together in order to really get this story out before, the California, that state trial. And that takes, it takes a village. It takes a lot of trust and partnership.
Sochil, I wonder, it must have felt like a very different kind of trust for you.
Yes. There was something that I really greatly appreciated about Jen so many things, just her life and her existence, of course, but as a professional, is that when you do speak about, I'll speak about myself now. I try to detach myself from speaking because I find it less painful. When I do have to speak about my story, it's been very, very difficult to go back to it. And I really appreciated that it was told not as a broken child. Jen, you captured the strength in me, this strong little girl that wanted to speak up. And yes, I was a victim. I was, and it was horrible what happened. But I was fighting so hard to be strong and to fight back for that little girl, that broken little Sochil. And the way the story was told, it was told through the Sochil, the little Sochil that took her fight back, the little Sochil that was standing up for herself. And when I went to Mexico City for the protest, the women's protest, so many women my age felt so empowered. They felt so empowered, and they weren't looking at me like poor Sochil, poor victim Sochil, and like I was a broken person. No, they felt inspired, and they felt angry, and they wanted to fight with me, and that's what I appreciated so much from this and from the way it was told. And I did trust Jen from the moment we spoke. I'm all about the energies and being genuine. And that's what I from you, Jen, from Rhonda, from Brian. But the trust was definitely built I can speak from my perspective, and I know from my husband and Francisco, some of my friends, it's just, it was like speaking with a family member. And so it was very, I feel very lucky that this team that HBO put together it was magic.
This togetherness brought you forward. And for you, Jennifer, also gave a vehicle to raise voices and the horrors that what women and men went through. Jennifer, Nassan Joaquin Garcia pled guilty, as we see in the documentary, and was sentenced to 16 years in prison. Has this been the end of the abuse, grooming, and sexual violation of girls and women?
Yes, I think we should. He did plead guilty, and 16 years. Quite frankly, it's a joke. He'll probably not serve all 16 years. He was so guilty that his defense team said that he should take this plea deal. Part of making the documentary and releasing it when we did was in hopes this was the state trial. This was a state case. So this was in the state of California. And what we're really hoping is that from the documentary, more survivors will come forward. There'll be a bigger, stronger case, and this will be a federal case. This all happened on US soil. So that's really what the hope is. But with that being said, Nason is still preaching from his jail cell. A lot of members still kind of have the wool pulled over their eyes. The church continues, he continues. And as far as I'm concerned, as if it keeps continuing and that hierarchy is allowed to exist under his rule, then I don't think the abuses are stopping anytime soon. So that's, again, that's why I think that these conversations, the series, survivors like Sochil coming forward, sharing, showing that there's a way out are more important than ever.
Sochil and Jennifer, can you share any positive updates that have occurred since the series was released last year?
Absolutely. More people have come forward. I'm going to let Sochil take this because she's actually on the front lines with her activism work, and it's just remarkable. So please.
Thank you, Jen. Yes, people are now very mad. They're very, very, very angry, that in a good way, because before nobody cared. And so the fact that there are 2 countries now in all of Latin America, but mainly in Mexico and the United States, being that there are so many people that want to get involved. So I've been partnering and speaking up about my story and the institution of the Light of the World with different organizations that like coalitions that have come together to end child sexual abuse. And we're working on getting a law passed on coercive control. It is illegal in the country of Australia. We want to pass that on here in the United States. We're working with actually the Consent Network, which is another amazing organization that works with legislators in order to help get laws and bills passed on coercive control and using stories of domestic abuse within LDM. There are now children speaking up in the Light of the World who are coming forward. These are Gen Z children, and they're now involved with some of the organizations that we're partnered with now. And one of them is the Keep Kids Safe org. We're actually going to Hill Day on the 26th of April. And we are trying to get a blueprint to get passed. I can share that with you guys if you would like to have that on your site. It would be amazing support for us. And it is the rise of a movement, the children's rights movement. So if anybody is out there who wants to help us end child sexual assault, child abuse as a whole, then please join the movement. We're beginning this on April 26th to next April, where we're having a 1 million survivor march in order to get the National Health Department to make child sexual assault a national health crisis. It is a pandemic, and it's time that the world knows and that the U.S. It does something about it.
You speak of this event that is, and a very important event that is happening on April 26th. I wonder if there are any legislators or lawmakers who will be attending this march who may wish to support your call to end sexual violence to children and women.
Yes. Well, let's hope. Let's hope they'll do the right thing. That some of them, I guess, they would rather take on less. I guess certain roles that don't make them the center of attention. But I think it's time, because these are fathers, or their mothers or grandmothers. And I think that it's time that this passes. I mean, it's 2023, and with the internet coming our way, these are new problems that we have to start focusing on. And I don't understand why sexual assault can be so institutionalized in high control groups like LDM. But I mean, because essentially they all start off in families. It's families. And Luz del Mundo is nothing but a family business. So this is just repeating itself across the world, and it's become a pandemic. Cults are a pandemic. And it's interesting how we have so many in the United States. And children are usually the ones that suffer the most, because they have no voice. Their power is taken away from day one. So, I mean, I lived it. And I know hundreds and thousands more lived it. And we're all very angry now, and we're speaking up.
What's wonderful is you're giving people a pathway to come in collaboration with you, who will be shocked by what they have seen. So thank you. And we would like to put that on our website as well. What do you hope that the viewers of the documentary and today's conversation will walk away with? This is open to both of you.
Oh.
I mean, why we make this is to educate. I think it's just really important to know that we have this kind of thing where it's almost voyeuristic as an American society, where it's like, oh, thank God that's not happening to us. Thank God that's not happening in our backyard. But this is happening in our backyard. It's happening in my backyard. It's happening right here in our major, like right here in Los Angeles and all of our major cities. And you know what, this could very easily be affecting you and your own family. And to Sochil's point, this is just a small microcosm of a much larger conversation and a much bigger problem. So that's really what we hope that they'll take away from the series, from these conversations.
Sochil, anything you would like to add?
Yes, I just to add on to that answer, I hope that people understand that when children of trauma, trauma like the trauma that I suffered, that so many survivors of high control groups suffer, these are people that will never have that possibility to have to live maybe without anxiety or post-traumatic stress, nightmares, all of these unfortunate, I guess you would say, diseases that a human being, we're stuck with for the rest of our lives. Just have compassion. And it's like Jen said, and that was one of my fears, that people would see it and they'd say, well, I'll only watch one episode, or that's really not for me, or hey, that's a good thing it didn't happen to me. But no, I mean, if we can get involved, but actually getting involved, maybe it doesn't have to be, I don't know, going to a protest. There are thousands of ways to get involved. It's just really being interested and having compassion, and understand that the world, it can get better, but we need unity and people to really want to make a change. It's really not only just watching it, it's getting involved. So I hope that people out there, when they watch this, they can really say, how can I help, and really come through it and push through that.
I'd like to thank both of you very much for this conversation today. But before we end, Sochil, you had mentioned earlier about how we can, or a person watching this, can best support and care for that loved one. Well, I guess I'd like to ask, what do you do to take care of you?
Ugh, um, I recently came back from a PTSD retreat with the Catherine Oxenberg Foundation. As you know, her daughter, like myself, survived the NXIVM cult. I survived the LDM cult. And it was very difficult to go through experiences where I had to sit down and understand and accept those dark abuses that I had isolated myself from. And so I was pushing for these past, since I left the cult. I didn't give myself a chance to stop and understand what had happened to me. It was easier for me to look for the solution or the answer, as opposed to understand that I was in pain and that I needed healing. And so it was very life-changing last month. And I am healing through depression. I'm healing through an eating disorder. I'm healing through very high panic attacks. And I'm looking for a way to just love that little girl in me. And sometimes it's just listening to songs that were used against me as a little girl. And they would bring back bad memories. And it's just sitting down and hearing that song again and dancing along to it as if I were 9 years old. And even dancing was used against me. So it's just going to that place where I don't shame myself and maybe dancing for maybe 10 minutes with my daughter, or maybe doing a TikTok with my daughter. Just little moments like that, or cooking for my baby, my husband. Those are moments that I take for myself and just heal little by little. Although I do need to get the heck out of here for a good one. But I'm taking baby steps.
So Jill, it's so important to recognize this, that you are taking the abuse and creating love of yourself, and cherish these moments. We need you and we need your voice. And Jennifer, we need your artistry. So Jill and Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation and for this incredibly important work that you are continuing to advocate for. Today, we've heard the realities of what happens when a person is sexually and emotionally and financially abused. We have heard about the isolation, the shame, and the terror that can happen and is part of life for people caught up in this situation. And we have heard the brave voices of Sochil and Jennifer who have exposed this, along with many others. What we have heard most importantly is that there is no shame in surviving, in being alive, and being free of sexual exploitation. I encourage our viewers to learn more about Sochil's story, as well as the journey of the other survivors who have shared their stories by watching the 3-part docuseries Unveiled, Surviving La Luz del Mundo on HBO Max. And please consult the accompanying resource directory on HBO.com. We at Know More are very honored to have been part of that resource directory. For survivors or loved ones who are looking for resources and support, the No More Global Directory is a first of its kind comprehensive international directory of domestic violence and sexual assault resources in over 200 UN recognized countries and territories in the world. We encourage you to visit nomoredirectory.org for more information and resources. We encourage you to remember that you are not alone, that there are brave filmmakers like Jennifer, brave survivors like Sochil, and brave platforms like HBO Max to create a platform for truth. We thank you for joining us today.